Okay, so without further ado, I would like to make an introduction and let Scott take it away. So welcome to the Window Hero webinar series. This is a series we do here at Indow to help support information and education about the historic window space. And Scott has spoken with us before. He was, I think, one of the very first hosts of this webinar series a few years ago, and we're delighted to have him back to walk us through things that you can be doing on your window that are certainly feasible for you to do yourself at home. But before I introduce Scott,
to the cave.
Let me show you. Oh, hold on just a moment here. Sounded like we have someone. There we go. So here in Portland, we have an exciting National Preservation Institute workshop coming out in August. So if we have viewers out there who are interested in learning even more about the historic window space, it's called Historic Windows, Managing for Preservation, Maintenance, and Energy Conservation. It's going to be taught by Gordon Bach.
Why am I on video?
It will be taught by Gordon Bach, who is a contributing editor of Traditional Building and co-author of The Vintage House. And by completing this workshop, you will receive a National Preservation Institute Certificate of Completion. It'll be a lot of fun. We're hosting it in the Architectural Heritage Center, and we'll be happy to meet all of those who would like to come out and attend. So here's a landing page down at the bottom that you can go to find more information about the event and a link to buy your ticket. Okay, so our speaker, Scott, is author of the Craftsman blog, Old Windows Made Easy, and Living in the Past. He's the owner of Austin Historical, where he helps renovate older homes, and really has been a great resource in the preservation community for making historic preservation not only approachable, but something that is reinvigorated within our communities. He's just done so much on a national level to help support information about preservation, and so we're excited to have him here today to share some of the latest of his efforts with you guys. And so, Scott, did you have anything to add before we started the video off?
No, just really excited to be here, and love that you guys keep doing these Window Hero webinars, and I think it's just a great way to get the information out there, because that's really our biggest battle, is learning about these windows, these old windows, and how to preserve them, that they are worthy of preservation. So if you can learn that, then the tricks of the trade and how to do it is the easy part.
Absolutely, you got it. Well, thanks so much. As you guys are watching the video here, again, make sure to plug your questions into the chat, and we'll get to them in just a little bit.
Hey guys, it's Scott Sidler here. Really excited to be back speaking at an Indow Window Hero webinar. I got lots of good stuff for you this time. It's been, gosh, like 2 years since I was on one of these, so it's exciting to be back. And I just really appreciate the folks at Indow for putting this on and helping educate people about old windows, wood and steel, and all the stuff that goes into them, all the trades, all the stuff that we need to do to try and preserve our built environment. It's so important. So one of the things I wanted to talk about today is I have a new book coming out, which I'm super excited about. It is called Old Windows in Depth, and it's going to be coming out a week from today. So it launches, what is that? That's Wednesday, May 23rd. And it is a big improvement, a big addition to the books I already have. I've got a couple of these right now. This is my first book, Living in the Past. You can get this on my website, thecraftsmanblog.com, if you'd like. This is the first book that came out in, I think, 2014. Amazon bestseller, good stuff. kind of all about the why of old houses and tutorials on all the basic stuff, different elements of the housing, like painting tutorials, windows, flooring, plaster, kind of a little bit of a broad helping of old house DIY. And then a couple years later, I came out with Old Windows Made Easy, which is a short little book, only 75 pages. But this was kind of to focus on the nitty-gritty of step-by-step how I restore old windows and what I think is the simplest way to take an old double-hung window and restore it. So in the new book, just so y'all know, Old Windows in Depth, same look as this. I mean, it's a new cover, but we're changing it up a bit. But this is 75 pages. The new book is about 220 pages. So I don't have a copy of it from the publisher yet, but it's coming. And gone much more in depth. There is a huge section on steel windows if you are dealing with those in your house. This was kind of the process of the basics of it, like what you would really need to know. But then there were things that I left out in here, like different glass options. What's a good glass that you could use? What are some bad choices for window glass? Some hardware options, working with the multitude of different types of hardware. And then also talk about a lot of the different windows. So you've got, single hung windows, you've got hoppers and awnings and casements, and there's a slew of them, astral windows. There's just a ton of different windows, and you might be one of the people who don't have a ton of double hung windows, or you have something really, really unique. I've tried to encompass the rest of it. So I like to say that this is like 80% of what you need to restore your windows. The other 20% is in this slew of details that I'll talk about in Old Windows in Depth. So you actually get the first part of Old Windows in Depth is Old Windows Made Easy, so you don't have to choose between the two. You can get everything I know window-wise on there. So one of the other things we talk about in there are the different balances. So in the first book, I talked a lot about ropes and pulleys, cast iron weights. I mean, that's kind of been the standard for old windows for hundreds of years, really. And then in the new one, I talk about things like tape balances, how to work with those, how to find the right ones when you're missing them. Spiral balances, which they look like tubes on the side of your windows. They're kind of a pain, but they are out there, especially in like 1920s to 1950s houses. I talk about vinyl jam liners, my favorite. I've really tried to go into a lot of the other details on there that were missing from the first book, that I thought maybe needed something either more in depth or I just never even covered in the first book. So today, one of the things we're going to talk about several things on old windows in this webinar, but just wanted to give you some background on myself. My company is Austin Historical. I'm based down here in Orlando, Florida. Yes, I'm in my workshop, and yes, it is hot, so if you see me sweating, that's because it's May in Florida. My company restores historic windows all across the country. Obviously, we're focused here in the Southeast because that's the easiest stuff for us to get to. But we work on stuff as far away as Massachusetts and Texas to the west. So we're not afraid of it no matter where it is. We focus on windows, but we do other things like plaster, wood flooring, sidings, and exteriors and things like that. So it's really fun. And then when I'm not doing that, on a few days a week, I am writing at thecraftsmanblog.com. And that's where I have tried to take what I do out in the field and try and boil it down into simple to understand and explain kind of concepts and tutorials, whether it's our videos on YouTube or the blog posts on the blog itself, that is to try and really help homeowners, especially with their old houses. Show them what to do. What's the, should I replace this? Should I repair it? How do I repair it? We've got stuff there on the website. There's a directory of different people all around the country that do historic preservation and restoration, so you can try and find someone in your area, which has been really helpful, I think, for a lot of readers. I've got a store with a lot of the products and tools that I'm going to show you today to help you restore your old houses, because old houses and old windows in particular are very DIY friendly. And I'm going to show you some of the things you can do on it today to get some of these repairs taken care of without having to hire a professional if you don't have the means or the time to. So all you really need to fix an old window in an old house is a little bit of time and a little bit of elbow grease. So that being said, we're going to get into the first portion here, which is epoxy. I have a window sash here, and it has a damaged corner here. The corner has been rotted away. The first thing you'd really want to do here if you do an epoxy treatment, if you've got rot, is you want to treat the rot with a fungicide like Boracare or Timbor, something to kill what's growing in here and causing the rot. And after that's done, I am going to get some of these supplies and show you how we are going to repair this epoxy. Very simple epoxy repairs. It's not complex, it's very attainable, and I'm going to show you that right now. This is one of my favorite epoxies. There are a lot of different wood epoxies and good epoxies for restoration. This is called, made by a company called Abitron. This is wood epox. This is a filler, so part A and part B. It's real simple. You mix it up 50-50, and you fill the hole with it. These I have already pre-mixed, but this is basically the primer and consolidant for the wood epox. Part A and part B of something called liquid wood. Liquid wood is just that. It is liquidy, and you mix it up and you brush it in there. I'll show you this. Abitron has these great restoration packs that have some of the wood epox filler and some of the liquid wood all together in a package. This is for the smaller version of what you want to do. It's only 6 ounces of each. These are a gallon each. We go through a lot of it, so that's what I have. When you work with epoxies, one of the most important things you can do is have gloves on. Epoxy is not skin friendly. It is very DIY friendly, but it is not friendly to your skin. So, I'm going to get prepared. Now, what I do, we use these simple little flux brushes, because whatever you put in the epoxy is pretty much toast, so use something disposable, something inexpensive. Usually a chip brush is fine too. And you're going to take these 2 parts, 50-50, and mix them up. Get everything out of there. Now this is assuming you have already done your fungicide treatment to kill the mold and the fungus that's growing in there, if there is mold or fungus. So I'm going to mix this pretty well. Usually when we do this, I'm going to want to mix this for just a couple minutes, and I'll do that while I talk, and let it sit for 5 or 10 minutes. I'm not going to do that today, so this is just a sample sash, but it needs a little bit of time to set up. Just basically you follow the manufacturer's instructions and you'll be just fine on this, so it's pretty easy. You just have to make sure that you combine both elements really well. Okay, I'm going to let that set up here for just a second, and I'll show you what we do here. So, I don't have a big section to repair. I need to get some of part A and some of part B. One of the things I like about Abitron a lot is that it's very simple to mix. You just get, you're mixing by volume, so half and half. I want to make sure I've got 2 pieces, you see there, that are about the same size. And then I'm going to take them, put my tops back on, get this out of the way. I'm just going to take them and mix them together. Now, I don't know how well you can see it, but these are 2 different color materials, part A and part B. One is white and the other one is kind of a tan color. You want to mix until it is exactly the same color. So mix that up. And once you get everything to the same color, which doesn't take too long, you're always going to get some runaways. There we go. Everything's the same color. I'm just going to set that aside. Now we're going to imagine that this has set up for about 5 minutes. And I am going to brush it into here. I'm going to brush the epoxy into the wood really well. This liquid wood helps consolidate any of the rotten wood fibers and strengthens them. And also serves to act as a primer for the wood epox, for the filler. so that it can fill in and have something to grip onto. Now, once you put this in here, you're going to let this soak into the wood for another 15 to 20 minutes. Wipe this off my table. Until it gets tacky. When it's tacky, again, we're just speeding this up for purposes of the video, but once this is tacky and it's been absorbed by the wood, you're going to fill the section with your wood epox. And you want to make sure that you really force it into all the cracks and crevices, because you don't want to have any voids in there. There wouldn't have been any voids if it was solid wood. So I'm forcing it in here and it's pushing out the end, which is a good sign. Now, some tricks that I like to do, you could leave it like that and try and sand it later, because this will take a patch like this, maybe by the end of the day it'll be hard enough to sand. What I like to do is grab a little piece of wood and kind of feather the edges. And I find that that helps with the sanding process. Stuff doesn't come out quite as easily. And then, but with this epoxy, you want to make sure that you overfill these joints. If you don't overfill them, the epoxy doesn't shrink, but you want to make sure that you can come and sand it back level where it should be. You don't want to have any voids or any, hollow spots or holidays in here. So it's filled plenty heavy there, and that way when we come back to it and it's ready to be sanded, you can just sand it smooth and it'll be great. Okay, I set that epoxy aside to cure. It won't be cured by the time we're done with this webinar, but I've set that aside, and there's another product I wanted to show you. So one of the things I deal with a lot on old houses is hardware. Old windows have a ton of different hardware, and a lot of people might think that it's, well, I don't know. A lot of people watching this probably know how beautiful the hardware is underneath there. But this is the kind of stuff you get. It's usually really painted over. This is a finger lift for sashes. And it's rusted, painted over, and honestly pretty ugly at this point. But that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful again. So one of the things we do, which is there's a lot of tutorials around. You can find some on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thecraftsmanblog. But there are a ton of these out there where you put the tutorials to show you how to do this, that is. You put this in a crock pot, not one that you will ever eat out of again, but you cook it in a crock pot with a little bit of soap or a little bit of baking soda and let it sit for 4 to 8 hours, depending on the amount of paint and the type of paint that's on here. And the paint will really just slough right off of this, which is kind of amazing. So it's a great way to clean up old hardware. But then you're left with something like this, which is a beautiful finger lift, but it is patina. It's aged. It's old bronze, just like this one is. Whoops. It's old bronze, and it has that beautiful old patina look. And that's, for me, what I like. I want that. But let's say maybe I've got a house where I'm missing a bunch of these, and these usually come, sometimes they're 1 to window, but sometimes they're 2 to on a bottom sash. So I'm gonna go out and buy a new one that looks like this, and I'm gonna put those on the same window, and that is not gonna fly, because they're not even close to the same. So what I developed was, basically we call it the patinator. It is a product that helps age hardware. So you can take new hardware like this and turn it into old hardware like this, just in a matter of seconds. So there are a lot of agers and patinators, things like that, on the market for bronze or steel or different metals. I kind of took one and I developed a patinator that, one, I thought was fairly DIY friendly. A lot of them require, 2 drops of this and then 5 gallons of water or whatever. I didn't want to have any dilution. So this is like ready in the bottle, And this bottle is about 1.5 to 2 years old. You can reuse this. This is one of the best things about it. You can reuse it again and again and again. This does not really wear out. Until you're out of the material, it still works. So 1.5 years later, and this bottle is still chugging along, and we restore a lot of hardware in this shop. So what I'm going to show you then is the process to do this. So the way this product works is you are going to set it in the patinator briefly, depending on how dark of a color you want to get, and then you're going to put it in water to stop the chemical reaction, and then you wipe it off with a towel. The reason that I developed this is I wanted something that worked with bronze and steel, so it works on both of those, and it works without dilution, which is key to me, so that there's no mistakes in how people dilute it and what kind of reactions they get, and that it works at a pace that you can do rather quickly, but is not too fast. Some of them you put in, you have to like pull it out right away. This one, in a matter of seconds, it's ready to go, maybe up to a minute if you need it really dark. But other than that, this shouldn't take you soaking overnight or anything. So I'll show you how this works close up and check it out. So with the patinator, you want to make sure that you have gloves on. And very important, it is an acid. And so what I'm going to do is I've got my patinaed one right here. And I've got my new shiny one here. So I'm going to put this here as a guide so I can watch. And all I'm going to do is dip this in the patinator and let it sit. You see it's already darkening it until it gets to about the color I need. Looks pretty good. Now you put it in the water to stop the chemical reaction. I'm going to wipe it off and let's see how close we got. One of the great things about this is a permanent finish, not like a painted finish that you would get that could very easily be scratched off things. So there we go. Never know that it's a new piece of hardware. It's that easy. All right, we've covered epoxy, we've covered hardware. Next thing I want to talk about is, I feel like is one of the most important things on old windows, but not particularly timely here in May, but that is weather stripping. There are just really a ton of different options when it comes to weather stripping. There's been a lot of testing by different organizations, the Window Preservation Standards Collaborative, which is a mouthful. But they did some testing a number of years ago about how efficient could you take an old window like this, an old double hung window, and make it. And what was discovered was that they could, with simple weather stripping techniques, we could take a double hung wood window and make it beat the 2012 energy codes, which is phenomenal. So the whole myth behind you've got to get new vinyl or new aluminum or new clad or new windows, replacement windows, that they'll make all the difference in the energy efficiency is just a lie. So one of the things that has been used, I've got some weather stripping samples here. One of the things that's been used for decades and decades here is called spring bronze. I'm gonna pull some of this out. Spring bronze is usually installed on the jambs, and it works best along the sides of the window here. It is, I think, one of the more attractive options. It's installed with these simple copper nails, and you have bronze metal weather stripping, so it does not wear out, it doesn't get compressed like foam or anything else that you really could weather strip with. This is kind of a lifetime option. This will last you well over 100 years. And not only that it'll last, it's just really attractive. So this is a great option. Now, to do this kind of weather stripping, you do have to take the sash out of the window, which is a little bit time consuming and requires a little labor. So that may not be what you want to do at the moment. So one of the easier ones that you can do without removing your sash is this right here. This is a silicone bulb weather stripping. And I'll show you a close-up of it. The silicone bulb, this is actually an adhesive silicone bulb. There's a simple little backing that I can pull off of here, and I'll show you how I can install this. I love to install this right here on the window on the meeting rail. This is one of the draftier parts of the window, the meeting rail. Sometimes the hardware doesn't line up, or whatever the cause is, and I can put this on the bottom sash meeting rail without having any troubles, without having to remove the sash. I just have to open my sash and get there. So what you typically will do is you'll take a length of this, you'll measure where you need to go to. You don't want to stretch it. Just measured right to here. I'm going to cut the excess off. And then you want to make sure that whatever surface you're putting it on, if it's a dusty, dirty surface, you obviously want to clean it. So I've got a little alcohol pad here. I'm going to wipe this down. Make sure that it is very clean so that when I put this on, it will adhere. There are other options that you can do. Some of the other options include using a router to cut in a kerf in here and it gets put in there. You can do that. I find that for most homeowners, it's not as, obviously breaking out a router is not as DIY friendly as just pulling adhesive like that off. So, I've got the adhesive off, and I'm going to put this right here and press it in place. And once this is in place, when your lock at the meeting rail is closed, this adds a really, really nice air sealing item in that spot, the meeting rail. That's super drafty at times. Some houses, the meeting rails line up perfectly and there's not an issue. But if you're one of those houses like mine that has issues like that, I mean, this was a simple thing. I went through all 36 windows in my house in a matter of a weekend and can put these all on. And for those of you in the Great White North, you're probably not thinking about this in the spring. That's fine, because the winter will come again. And if you're doing some tune-up stuff to your windows, which we'll talk about in just a little bit, now would be a good time to do this. But for those of you in the South, the air conditioning days are coming, if they're not here for you already. And putting this on is going to keep the air conditioning in the house instead of it going out there. So weather stripping is not just something that you want to do in the fall before the cold weather gets here. If you live in the South, it's something you want to do in the spring before the hot summer gets here. So that's how to put this on. Very simple option. There are a lot of seasonal options that you can do in the winter or summer, because for those of us like in Florida, Georgia, all the Southeast, I don't typically open my windows in the summer. It's just too hot and humid out. And so some of the things that the people up north do on their windows, like rope caulk, are things that I can do in the summer to keep the air conditioning in and keep the hot, humid air out. So think about that. You can use some of those things. I know obviously this is being presented by Indow, which gives a great option for an interior storm window, but there are a lot of different options, and I always suggest people start with the low-hanging fruit. Take care of something simple like this that's going to cost you about $1.50 to $2 in material right there, and that's on a window. It's done. Rope caulk works great too. There are some caulks. Red Devil makes one. I've got a video on there about on my YouTube channel about some seasonal weather stripping options, and there's just a lot of options out there. So don't think that there are no options other than replacement to get energy efficient windows. This is the place where you want to start before you start sinking tens of thousands of dollars into replacement windows. Start here, work your way up, all right? Some of the other things that I wanted to talk about here are some of the spring tune-up things that I suggest to people. I talk about this in the book, and we'll do a little light work on this. Where's a good corner? Here's a good corner. Okay. We're going to work on this sash, and I'll show some close-ups of it. All right, we've talked about a lot of different stuff, and now I want to talk about what is, I think, most timely for when this webinar is coming out, which is kind of a spring tune-up that I like to do on all of our windows. We, for a lot of our clients, will provide maintenance programs, which means spring is best, but fall is good too. But as long as you do it once a year, that's really what's most important. And there's two main things that we do in our window maintenance programs. The first is we come through and inspect glazing putty and make sure if there's any missing glazing putty. This is like this, for example, is a very rough window. It's kind of fallen apart in a lot of ways. We pulled this out. We just keep it in our storeroom for demonstrations and things like this. But you want to look for any loose or missing glazing putty on here. This one has plenty. There's a lot of really rough putty. Rough putty doesn't necessarily pose an issue, but the missing putty causes problems for these windows. So the first thing I'm going to walk you through is the putty removal in some sections here, just doing some spot glazing, which is great for the seasonal stuff. Excuse me. And the second thing we'll go over is paint touch-up. So let's do some glazing putty removal right now. So the first thing you want to do is you want to look for weak points like that, in your glazing putty. You don't need to remove all of this, but I can see that this section here has failed and is ready to come out. So I'm going to pull this out and ready it for new putty. The putty is really important in your air sealing process here. It keeps water from, it's at a nice bevel, so it keeps water from pooling right here. It allows it to sheet off of the sash. So if you've got it missing in places, it's just going to create a little place for the water to pool, and that's going to promote rot and premature failure. So I'm pulling this out. I've still got some of that epoxy repair we did earlier. And the rest of this, while not terribly attractive, seems pretty well in there. So clean this off. Now, if there is a little bit of old putty remaining, it's just fine. Old putty and new putty will bond to each other. And I like to use Sarco Multi-Glaze Type M. This works really well in the shop, but not so well in the field. It's not supposed to be exposed to ultraviolet rays while it's curing. It needs to be painted. So if you're going to be glazing in place, which, talking about these springtime repairs, I think that maybe Sarco Dual Glaze might be a better option for you. But you're just going to take some putty and a putty knife. I'm going to pack the putty back in here. And we're just doing some spot glazing repairs. It's really easy to do. Great way to up the efficiency of your windows and keep them lasting. So this is not as beautiful as what it would be if you're glazing, a restored window in the shop. But that's fine, because what we're talking about is extending the life of these windows. So dig off this excess putty. And once you're done with this, make your corners nice and neat. Once you're done with this, you'll want to be ready to paint this once it gets a good skin on it. You always want to wait till the putty gets a skin on it. Usually it depends on your weather, how warm it is, how much air is flowing around it. So if you've got relatively warm weather, then you should be ready for paint with Type M in just a few days, or with Dual Glaze if it's out on site within a couple weeks. But the way you'll know is that you'll feel a skin on top of the putty. Right now, as I feel this, it's super smooth and oily. Once when it's ready for paint, you'll feel kind of a, how do you describe it? It feels a little bit rougher. It feels maybe like 220 grit sandpaper. I'm sure everybody knows exactly what that feels like, but really it does feel like a very fine grit sandpaper. And that's how I know that it's ready. It turns a little bit of a deeper yellow too, and it's not as easily messed up with fingerprints. So once you've done these, you've laid in this putty, you're in pretty good shape for repairing this, and that's a nice springtime tune-up. Do that, let it sit, and then we'll come back and talk paint. All right, we've talked about epoxies, we've talked about hardware, we've talked about weather stripping, we have talked about spot glazing. Our Frankenstein window here is looking pretty good. Actually, it looks awful, but we're gonna make it look better in just a little bit. And the last thing you really need to know for a springtime tune-up that's super important is paint touch-up. It is often overlooked. Everybody talks about, hey, I've got to use the best paint. I've got to use these extraordinary techniques. There's even companies like, Rhino Shield or things like that are a permanent ceramic coating for your house. Don't mess with these different options, these weird options out there to try to avoid painting. It is just a fact of life that paint wears out. Paint's whole purpose on your house is to be a protective coating that wears out. When it wears out, it's like a case, think of it this way, it's like a case on your iPhone. The case is there to protect the iPhone. It's not there because the product is not really the case. The case is serving a purpose. Paint serves a purpose, especially on your old windows. It seals the putty. It seals these epoxy repairs. It seals the glass to the putty. It seals everything on these windows and keeps them in good working order. And when the paint fails, your job as the homeowner is to come through and touch up the paint. Now, you could do what a lot of people do, which is I'm going to paint my house and I'm going to leave it alone for 15 years and see what happens. But that results in a lot of issues where the paint is slowly going to fail in areas. There's going to be a storm and branches come and chip off part of the paint. Animals, all kinds of critters come around your house. Paint fails in places. It doesn't fail all at once. It fails in small little places here and there, pinholes, large chunks, scrapes, cuts, things like that. So when those little things happen, and they're going to happen throughout the year, it makes the most sense every spring or every fall, or whenever you want to do it. I recommend in the spring to get it done and come out just with a gallon of your paint and just walk around and spot touch up everything. So on this window, obviously once this putty was cured, we're going to come through and touch that up. The epoxy, once it's sanded and cured, we're going to come through and touch that up. But then there's little things. If you look at this window, like right here, there's just a small chip of paint. Not a big deal. How long would it take me to do that? If I've got my paintbrush in my bucket, I'm just going to touch that up and move on. Again, it's not going to be, you don't have to do perfect work on this. There's a difference between, we'll always say in the trades, there's like best practices, and then there's average work, and there's subpar work. Sometimes subpar work is better than no work at all. So I'll put that out there. Some people may disagree with me, but I would rather come through and touch up the paint on this sash and have it done. Maybe I should spot prime that. Maybe I should sand the edges down to burn it in to make sure it looks just right. I should do that ultimately. But what's better is that I come through and just simply touch up the paint and keep it sealed for another season. And if you do that every year, if you go through one Saturday a year and just go through your house, all of it on the outside mostly. The inside paint chips, they're not a problem because the weather isn't getting into it. But what I think is most important is coming through once a year, put on some paint clothes, spend a Saturday out there, put your earphones on, listen to some music, and touch up the paint where you see it. It's going to extend the life of these windows by decades very easily. And it's going to extend your paint job. Maybe your paint job in your neck of the woods is only going to last 12 years. Maybe if you come through and touch it up, you're going to get 15 or 16 years out of it. That's a significant savings, I think, especially when it comes to windows, where there's just a lot of nooks and crannies and crevices for water to get stuck. And when water gets stuck there, that's where we have problems. And I promise you, if anybody knows about water issues, it's us here in Florida. The termites, the rot, the things that we deal with since it rains every afternoon at 3 o'clock is something that I think the rest of the country could benefit from. There are woods we can't use down here for our windows because they'll rot too quickly that the rest of the country can. So, anywhere that you've got water issues, you probably understand this already. For the rest of us who live in drier climates, it's good to know that if you can just keep this paint touched up, you'll be in good shape. So I think that's about it for this Window Hero webinar. Again, the new book is coming out, Old Windows in Depth. You can check on the craftsmanblog.com. It will be there. It'll be in the store first. It's going to be on Amazon, Kindle, all the good places that you buy books. And we are going to give away 20 books to random participants of this webinar. So I hope you've tuned in. Even if you were just here for a few minutes and got bored with what I was saying and checked out, that's okay. But if you participated in the webinar, stay tuned. Don't buy the book yet. You'll get. We're going to do a drawing after this and see who is going to win the books. So I'll be sending you a print version of the book, not just an ebook. So thanks so much. Take care of those windows. Save those historic buildings. And till next time.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott. That was a really wonderful presentation. It just gave a wonderful comprehensive view of what homeowners should be doing on the windows. And we have some questions here from our audience. So if any of you out there would like to ask Scott a question, just type it in the chat box and we'll get to it shortly. For those of you who tuned in a little bit later, we will be sending out a recording of this. So you can either rewatch the complete video or share it with your friends. Okay, so our first question from the audience is, what are Scott's recommendations for removing the glass panes without breaking them? I have old wavy glass and I'm scared of ruining it. I have practiced on non-wavy panes and have broken every one I attempted to remove. And that's from Michelle. We feel your pain.
Yes, it happens. It happens a lot, Michelle. One of the things we do, like if you're doing a lot of windows, there are some good plans online. Dave Bowers at Old Window Restores, and that's Old OLDE Window Restores, has some plans for like $20 on how to build a steam box out of maybe $100 worth of material. And steam really works great. You could even, without building a steam box, even just use like a garment steamer. And if you steam the putty, it softens it up enough that you can get it out without breaking the glass. Another way that some people do is through using some of the infrared heaters, like a Speed Heater. There's a new one, Speed Heater Cobra, that is able to like spot heat up the putty, and without heating up the glass. You can put some aluminum flashing on the glass if you want to make sure it's really protected. But it is a challenge. I mean, even with as many windows as we restore, we probably break 10 to 15% of the glass that comes out, and it just is what it is, unfortunately. Just being really careful so you're not pushing pressure. You saw in the video, I'm using a chisel, just a regular old wood chisel on the putty, and just being careful not to put too much downward pressure onto the glass, and work trying to exploit those little spots on the putty where you see some weaknesses, and then just work slowly, methodically. There's not a big science to it other than steam and infrared. The rest of it's just being careful. But I agree, those really thin panes of glass are simple to break.
Great, wonderful response there, and good question too. I know from personal experience that the steamer is a better option. I have definitely still broken the windows with the Speed Heater.
Yeah.
So another question we have is any suggestions on where to get Sarco in smaller quantities for DIY use? They've been having some trouble finding it in the area. And another user pointed out that Amazon sells various sizes, but really for any of the tools, where do you suggest people go to find materials?
Well, I would say, I mean, I might be biased, but I would say on the Craftsman blog, at the link, on the top, there's a link that says store. If you go to the store, I'm actually one of the people who sells it on Amazon, so you might actually have bought it from me. Sarco sells quarts of dual glaze, but they do not do quarts of multi-glaze. But I decided I wanted people to be able to use multi-glaze if they're restoring the windows in their shop or in their garage or something. So on our site, you can buy it in quarts or gallons of multi-glaze or dual glaze. So you can always buy it on Amazon, but it's honestly a little bit cheaper on my site because the fees that Amazon charges for us to sell on there. So that's about the cheapest way I think you can find it right now in small portions.
Awesome, good. So if you're painting a sash with multiple lights, one of our users had suggested masking paint. And it was even featured on this old house. Do you have any experience in using that?
I have used a product called Liquid Mask, and I don't like it. Basically what the process, and I see a lot of painters do this, is they'll spray Liquid Mask all over the window. And what Liquid Mask is a product that peels away very easily. So you could basically, they'll spray it all over the window, they'll spray paint on top of the Liquid Mask, and then they'll cut out the section around the glass, and they can peel it away from the glass very easily. But the problem I've seen with those is that they allow the paint to peel off of, Liquid Mask peels very easily as it's supposed to. So either you cut in a nice line on your glass with Liquid Mask by hand, and then you can peel it away, which kind of defeats the purpose, or you spray the whole thing and then you peel that away. Well, your finished paint is going to peel away too. And I've seen that on a few jobs that we've done where we were just tasked with restoring the windows and glazing them, and then a paint company came by and did liquid masking on the glass. I think that, you know, if you're intimidated by trying to cut it in by hand, I think going back to blue tape, if you want to use that, will work. It can work well. I tend to be of the old school version of, it may take a little while. If you're doing just one window, sure, put some tape on it, but you're using a lot of blue tape if you try and do it that way or these other ways. Get a good paintbrush, like a good quality Purdy paintbrush, a sash brush that's meant for cutting in tight lines. And after the first couple sashes, you'll get better and better. The line doesn't have to be perfect. Kind of the rule of thumb is it needs to look clean and straight lines from about 6 feet away, because especially from the outside, that's where you're looking. And don't use a razor blade to cut back on the glass either, because it causes the paint to peel and fail early.
Great, wonderful information. Thank you for that. So here is a very common question. I think this one comes up in almost every single webinar we do. how do you deal with windows that are painted shut? What's your best tip? And maybe to throw some spice in there, what's if there's any suggestion that normally isn't covered, or you have seen an interesting technique, or maybe even a failure to just throw in some new content to the mix, that would be great.
Right. Yeah, getting painted shut windows to work is like the biggest challenge, right? Or at least trying to get them out again. Usually, there's a couple tricks to it. One is really using a razor knife, and I love a 5-in-1. That I will take that. If you look at the picture that's on here right now, kind of where I'm working on the meeting rail there, putting the hardware on, you can take a 5-in-1 and put it between the two. Put it between the two meeting rails and pull the sashes apart. Once you take your inside stops off, if you put that 5-in-1 between the meeting rails and pull it apart, that bottom sash can come out right away. It's super easy, even if it's caked with paint, because you'll be able to tilt the top side in once both of your stops are off. So that makes that one super easy. The only way to get the top sash really moving is either with a razor knife or, again, 5-in-1, a putty knife all the way around the sides of it. You can use a tool called a window zipper. C.R. Lawrence makes one of those, and it's another nickname for it would be a sash saw. And it's a really, really kind of like paper thin thing made from aluminum that has little teeth on the side of it. It's meant to slide in between the sections on a sash that get painted shut. And they don't last very long. The ones that are out there, they kind of wear out pretty quickly, but it's like a $7 to $10 tool. And you can probably do a handful of windows, maybe a dozen windows before it's dead, and you have to go buy a new one. I don't really like disposable tools, but it is what it is. If you are taking your sash out, you can use what we call duckbill pliers. They're for welders, and they're vice grips, basically, that look like they have a really wide mouth on it. And we use that to grab onto the parting bead to be able to pull it out, and that makes life a ton easier. So there's really not a whole lot of tricks other than that meeting rail trick for me getting the bottom sash out. The top sash is tough. You can, once you get it kind of moving a little bit, you can put a pry bar up above the top of it and try to pry it down a bit. But yeah, you're just going to have to get all that paint off of there until before it's going to move anywhere.
Nice. And can you repeat one more time those tools that you had just mentioned?
Yeah. So one is the window zipper. And that's specialty wise for windows. It's by C.R. Lawrence. The other one, you can find that on Amazon. And then the basic ones I use are a 5-in-1 or just a firm putty knife, and that I'll use to get the stops, the interior stops off, and pry that meeting rail apart.
Great. So we've had some really good questions in here. Another one is acknowledging that we've covered a lot of nice things about the sashes, but what are your tips about sill repair?
Sill repair. If you're usually, very rarely do we have to take the whole sill out and replace it. I do cover some of that in the book that's coming out, but usually what I tend to do is large epoxy repairs, digging out the portions of the sill that are rotted, treating it with a borate, and then filling in with the epoxy. That covers most of what we do. It's usually, it gets really involved and very expensive and time consuming to take a sill out and try and put it back in. So I recommend doing epoxy repair or a Dutchman, replacing some of the wood if necessary whenever you can. One thing I will say is if you have like really weathered sills, John Leake has talked about this in some of his books, is if you put epoxy on top, like if you skim the top of a really weathered sill with epoxy, there's a good chance that moisture migration through the wood is going to push that epoxy right back out of there. So you can use the epoxy to repair damaged or missing sections, but to skim coat things and make them smooth is really not a very good idea because it doesn't last.
Good. So thanks for calling that out. Now, if any of our viewers out here get into their project and meet that spot where they go, oh my gosh, something is happening that I am not expecting and I don't know how to fix this, what would you suggest are their best resources for damage control?
It really depends what it is. There's a lot. I mean, Old Windows Made Easy I put out there, which is kind of like the the smoothest process. Let's go through it like this. If you run into real challenges or weird stuff, Old Windows In Depth is the one that has a lot of those. Hey, if this happens, which is possible but not likely, then you should do it this way. So that book has a lot of stuff. There's also a lot of different articles on my blog. There is a directory of different providers that I would say go to if you get in a little deep and you're like, I just don't know if I can do this anymore or have the time or skill. You can get contractors in your area. I don't know, there's people all over the country in there and some in southern Canada. So just depends what the issue is, who you'll find. But I've got a ton of tutorials on the blog that can walk you through there. John Leake has a lot of resources on his website, Historic Homeworks, and you can check that out. There's forums on there. There's usually somebody who's run into your problem before and posted either a question or a picture about it online in some of these forums too.
Wonderful. And that directory is through the Craftsman blog website, right?
Yeah, so it'd be at the craftsmanblog.com/directory.
Okay, wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk muttons. We have one of our listeners out there says that they have muttons that look like arches and some of the muttons are missing. So how would someone replicate those?
Doing mutton replication is usually pretty tough, especially if it's some of the, I'm assuming some of the arch ones are usually like 1800s or older. We've seen some from the 1700s that are some really interesting profiles that were, just in that specific region. And so probably one of the easier ways is to take, if you've got a healthy sample of it and you want to try and do it yourself, you can take that sample to a local woodwork, a mill shop or something, and see if they can run you a few feet of it or however many you need of it, can make you something like that. If you bring them a sample, they can usually do it. If you can't find anybody locally, there's a lot of window restorers on my directory, or you can also go to the Window Preservation Alliance, which is windowpreservationalliance.org. And there's a lot of members there who might be in your area or even out of town where you can send the muntin that you need replaced. That they can maybe replicate what's on there and send you back several feet of it or however much you need.
Great, thank you. So Sandra has a question about triple hung storm windows that are older, and they include screens, which is great for a lot of people, but they're kind of unsightly. How would you suggest dealing with that?
I mean, as far as storm windows, exterior storm windows do wonders for old windows in terms of their energy efficiency and in terms of just extending the life of your windows. They're protecting it from the exterior elements. So if they're ugly and you want to change them out, there are other options. You could do new aluminum options that are more attractive by companies like Monray or Allied Storms. There are, you could have a local craftsman, or companies like mine will build and ship to other people. We build traditional wood storms. There are a couple companies out there who build, we don't do these, but who build wood storms that are changeable, old window restorers. Dave Bowers, that I mentioned earlier about the steam box. He has wood storm windows that are historically accurate, and you can change out the glass panel to a screen panel. So there are some other options out there, whether you want to go historical or back to like a new aluminum option that's just more attractive. But usually the wood storm windows are more attractive. They fit the look of it. They're just not operable like the triple track are.
Okay, great. And I'll just add in, because I have to, another option to eliminate the unsightliness from the exterior is to consider the interior storm. Some value. So if you're interested in looking at that, check out our website. I think it definitely helps with preserving the aesthetic look from the exterior of the home.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So we are running up on time, but we'll try and slip in one more question. So if I repaired a damaged area of an interior sash with wood putty before I became aware of epoxy, can I remove the putty because I didn't like the results and replace it with epoxy?
Absolutely. Yeah, very easily. Dig out whatever you don't like in there and put that, use the liquid wood or whatever brand you're going to use, the liquid wood in there, and your wood epox. And it's important to use those two together. There are other systems. There's another epoxy called Conserve, which I think is really good. There's West systems, which I think is even more flexible in terms of the application than Abitron, but it's much more complicated. You know, there's several parts and you have to mix them to the right things. I wanted something really simple for our shop that it was basically harder to screw up.
Nice, great suggestion. So we are about at time. I'd be happy to email some of those that didn't get their question answered to get them a response. But any other questions you might have, I highly encourage you guys to go check out the new ebook and Scott's website, which contains just so much information, and I'm sure that you'd find a lot of the answers to your questions right on the site there. But Scott, I really appreciate your time. This was a wonderful presentation that I think was very informative for a lot of our viewers.
Hey, my pleasure. And I saw there were a couple questions I could answer real quick.
Sure.
That I wanted to give an answer to. There's one I saw in there from Jen that was the name of the weather stripping that was on the sash meeting rail. That was a silicone bulb, and it's a self-adhesive silicone bulb. So you can find that. We usually get it on Amazon, but there's a lot of places to get it. And then Ralph had asked about the Curtis Silent Type windows. They have a brass tongue and groove on the sides. That's called integrated metal weather stripping. There's a lot of different brands that use them. I think the Curtis Silent Type is very specific how they do it, but there is a tutorial in the book about that too, because it is a little bit challenging if you've got to get the windows out and moving again. So before you tear it out and mess with it, I definitely want to check out the tutorial. It's longer than and things like that, but it is possible.
Great.
So that was it.
Well,
and thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, we appreciate it. And especially because this is Preservation Month this month. So all of you out there are already contributing to preservation knowledge and community through just simply watching this, sharing it with your friends, and starting discussions about how we can preserve historic architectures within our neighborhoods. So thank you all for watching. We will send out an email with a link to the full video for you to watch and share at a later point. Thank you.
Thanks.